Welcome to the latest edition of the College of American Pathologists CapCast. I'm Becca Battisfor, Content Strategist with the CAP. In this episode, our guest host, Dr. Paner, will be talking with experts about Cancer PathCHART, a vital new resource for cancer registrars, clinicians, pathologists, researchers, and developers. Cancer PathCHART, short for the Cancer Pathology Coding, Histology, and Registration Terminology, is a first-of-its-kind initiative to update cancer surveillance standards for tumor site, histology, and behavior code combinations and associated terminology. These are among the most important data fields captured from pathology reports. Previously, variability in terminology and outdated cancer surveillance standards have led to inconsistencies and inaccuracies in the data captured. To address this issue, the National Cancer Institute, the College of American Pathologists, and 9 other global partners have collaborated to update tumor site morphology standards, the first time in over 15 years. Through this standardization, cancer surveillance will more accurately reflect medical practice to support cancer research and public health without altering cancer registration workflows. Before we get into the questions, let's learn more about our guests. Dr. Paner, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Becca. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to CapCast. My name is Gladell Paner. I'm a geopathologist at the University of Chicago. And in the previous 6 years, I had the pleasure of working for the CAP Cancer Committee and the CAP Pathology Electronic Reporting, or the PERT Committee. And during this time, I had a fantastic, amazing time with our guests.
So I'm Alison Van Dyke. I am dual trained in pathology and cancer epidemiology and work solely in public health with the National Cancer Institute at the National Institutes of Health with the Surveillance Epidemiology and End Results, or SEER, Cancer Registry System.
I'm Rich Moldwin, and I'm a lead physician informaticist in the group of cancer protocols and data standards at the College of American Pathologists. My clinical background is pediatric hematology oncology, and I work mostly on data standards for cancer informatics, largely with the registry world and improving data captured from laboratories to transmit them into registries.
I'm Kay Washington. I'm a GI pathologist at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, and I served on the CAP Cancer Committee for a number of years. I've been involved with AJCC for 3 or 4 editions now, and currently I'm on the Council for Scientific Affairs for CAP and chair of the Center Guideline Committee.
Great. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. And Dr. Paner, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Becca. So for a start, let's discuss the background about cancer surveillance system. And the first question is for you, Alison. So tell us, what are the cancer surveillance systems in the U.S.?
There are 2 sources of funding for cancer registries in the United States. One is from the National Institutes of Health. The other is the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention National Program of Cancer Registries, or NPCR program. There is a little overlap in funding by CDC and NCI for some of the registries. And in total, we cover roughly 98% of the United States population. Just to add a little more context, you can access SEER data. You can also apply to access CDC data, but also CDC aggregates data across both SEER registries and CDC registries, funded registries, and that's the U.S. Cancer Statistics Database. And then there's a one layer higher, and that is the NACER, the North American Association for Central Cancer Registries, which combines data across the United States registries and registries covering Canada.
Thank you, Alison, for that detailed description. So how is this cancer surveillance data used? Tell us, why is it so important for pathologists?
So I'll tackle the first question first, and that is that the data, cancer surveillance data across the globe, and especially in the United States and North America, determines research funding, cancer control program planning and prevention planning and funding. But in terms of pathologist use, and why it's so important to pathologists, is that a lot of pathologists are not aware that they can actually apply to have access to some of the population level data. So if you have a research project in mind that you're interested in doing using population-based data, you can apply to have access to address some of your research questions that are pathology related. We do, for example, for breast cancer, we do capture select data items like biomarkers, ER, PR, HER2, and some others. So I think from an academic standpoint, it's also important for the pathologist because you could actually do some interesting research questions, address interesting research questions with the population-based data. The other thing of why population-based data is why it's so important is that most studies out there are, and especially tissue-based studies, are done in the context of clinical trials, and they're not representative of the U.S. population, and often are underrepresenting minority populations with subpopulations within the U.S.
Thank you, Alison. I'm sure some of our listeners will be interested in using the SEER data, and as you hear, it will be available for use for research.
Yeah, I want to add one thing, Gladell, if that's okay.
Sure.
We will be sharing a schematic, a figure that explains how you can gain access to the data, how you can explore using publicly available data visualization tools and exploration tools that are available on the web.
Thank you, Alison. So now let's focus on Cancer PathCHART. And I'm pretty amazed how the first letters of the words spelled and fitted into chart. Cancer PathCHART. So how did the idea for Cancer PathCHART came about, Alison?
This was done at a meeting that Rich Moldwin, my supervisor, Shaban Nagoida, and also Karen Holkauer from the CAP, who actually oversees the cancer protocols. We were discussing the big problem in cancer surveillance standards in that there's a long time lag between when new entities or changed standards for tumor classifications come out in the World Health Organization classification of tumors books and when they get implemented in the cancer registry community. And that creates a lot of data quality issues. Also, there are big differences sometimes between what the standards are and what terminology is actually used in practice and what the registrars actually can code when they're collecting data. So that's how it started, was trying to reduce that gap between biomedical knowledge and practice and the cancer surveillance data that can be captured. Rich, anything to add?
Yeah, so I remember that first meeting we had in Gaithersburg sometime pre-COVID. I think it was probably 2019, 2018, something like that, when we started talking about this in earnest. So I had been working on a variety of NACER committees, that's the North American Association of Central Cancer Registries. So I've been in a number of these committees for about almost 20 years now, since 2006. And I noticed a number of places where better collaboration, better data management, better use of standards, and improved interoperability, in other words, how we exchange data from pathology systems to registry systems. If we could make some improvements in those areas, that we could reduce certain difficulties in registry operations. Some of those difficulties relate to the time of reporting between when we first know that a case is present till the time it gets reported into, let's just say, a hospital registry, and then eventually into the state central registry. But other difficulties are non-standard terms used for histology, for example, that can create a lot of back and forth to figure out what the pathologist really meant from the point of view of the terms that are used in the registries. They may not match. So some of the improvements that we would need to do, they would need to reach back into laboratory practice settings, something that NCI or CDC or NACER couldn't do on their own. But they would also need to reach back into AP/LIS systems. But these reach backs, they seemed reasonable, at least from the pathology practice and the CAP perspective. And so I thought that there was a way that we could work more closely together to get that to happen. And so one example that we mentioned already is the need to harmonize these frequently updated cancer histology terms. Sometimes new terms come out in a paper or even in a WHO Blue Book, and we don't know on either side, the CAP side or the or on the registry side, when we should adopt these new terms and new codes. Sometimes codes undergo some coding changes, codes that we use internally in the software for reasons that are not documented, at least not any documentation that we've seen, and they just pop up out of nowhere. And we need to keep track of these things and document them and where the changes came from and when they were first applied and so forth. So that we include these new coding systems with the as they come out with the CAP ECPs, the electronic cancer protocols. And then we're trying very hard now to work on the same tables of codes and terms that are used between registry operations and the CAP operations for the cancer protocols, ECPs, and registry software.
Thank you, Rich. My next question is for you, Alison. So why is Cancer PathCHART so critical for cancer surveillance data quality?
Sure. So the major standards for tumor site and morphology combinations had not been overhauled in a very long time. New entities had been added as they came out, but a major cleanup has not happened in quite some time. And so it's focusing on the three most important foundational data items in cancer surveillance. That's tumor site, histology and behavior, and the histology and behavior together are counted as or termed as morphology. And so those combinations determine all downstream data captured, especially data like staging, site-specific data items, or what we call SSDIs, like the biomarkers and other types of data. Also, if we want to accurately attribute a patient's cancer, we need to make sure that the statistics reflect the disease that patient experienced. So that's why it is so important that we have this massive overhaul and cleanup of the data items.
I would like to shift to to Kay. So Kay, I have a question for you, and this is regarding the pathologist involvement in this initiative. So how did pathologists and registrars work together to create the Cancer PathCHART standards?
Pathologists and registrars work together at every step of this process, basically. The first thing we did, the content work group pulled the new WHO terms and the historical terms as well, and compared the histology and site combinations. Sometimes there were dozens, if not hundreds, of terms to look at, and determined whether they were biologically valid, biologically unlikely, or biologically impossible. And the registrars really had a lot of input all along the way because they're dealing with whatever the pathologist is diagnosing and trying to fit it into their list of terms. So they were involved early on, but then at the end of the review process, after a group of subject matter expert pathologists had looked at these terms and come to a consensus on them, then the registrars looked at that list again to make sure it wasn't in conflict with some of their important registry rules, such as their solid tumor rules.
Thank you, Kay. I'm sure when you're going through that review of the terminologies, the tons of terminology, there will be surprises. So let me ask you, what surprised you the most in conducting the reviews of site morphology combinations?
Well, starting out, you think, well, it's just going to be a matter of incorporating the new WHO terms. And that was far from it. That was the easiest part of it, I think. What really surprised me was this huge list of vague or archaic legacy terms that the registrars were struggling with. I mean, you would not believe these things. Epithelioma. I mean, what is that? I have no idea. After practicing surgical pathology for 30 plus years, how does that apply to a colon cancer? So those have been retained for good reason because we need to stage as many cases as possible. So they were retained for legacy purposes. But we need to, one of the goals here is to try to clean these things up. The other thing that surprised me, and I think we can address this going forward with pathologist input, is there are a lot of almost identical non-standard terms that pathologists love to use because we're attuned to the nuances of our diagnoses. So we tend to be consummate splitters, but I think that is not in many cases helping either the patient, the clinicians treating the patient, or the registry world. So we need to take a good look at our WHO list and try whenever possible to use standard terminology when we're diagnosing cancers. It's just a matter of some of these don't add value and they're complicating the registrar's work. So that was a big surprise as well. How many of those almost identical terms are included in these lists?
There was one example, concrete example of sound-alike terms that we found by going through this process and looking at how many cases were diagnosed or coded, recorded by the registrar in the last 5 years of data we looked at. For example, instead of adenocarcinoma of the prostate code, they were some of them were coding acinar cell carcinoma. And so that is an example of now acinar cell carcinoma is impossible in the prostate, and the adenocarcinoma of the prostate is that code is actually the valid code to use. So in the process of doing Cancer PathCHART, we found some concrete examples that will change things.
Thank you, Alison. That was supposed to be my question. So there were biologically impossible terms, but as you mentioned, although not many, there were cases that were coded under those terms.
I will say, to add to what Kay, you mentioned, the vast majority of newly impossible terms or codes that we determined through the Cancer PathCHART review process, most of them had 0 case counts in the last 5 years of diagnosis. So that's reassuring.
Thank you, Alison. Kay, I have a side question for you. You mentioned that basically our standard for terminology is the WHO. Can you comment on those classifications that are not the WHO classification?
Sometimes those are in conflict with WHO classifications. Sometimes there's overlap or sometimes expansion of the terms. And pathologists, we recognize, are going to use those terms. And I think Cancer PathCHART will offer a framework for mapping those terms to the correct histology code. I mean, the WHO is a starting point. Certainly not everybody uses strictly the WHO list. There are additions, etc., to it. And the blue books are updated, about every 5 years? So it makes sense that every now and then something is going to emerge as an accepted entity in between revisions of the blue books.
Thank you, Kay. And I would like to shift to you, Rich. So how is CAP using the standards in the cancer protocols?
Before getting into that, I just sort of want to mention that one of the things that Cancer PathCHART has done is really increased, I think, the communication between the various groups that are participating in Cancer PathCHART. And because of that communication, we can much more easily work on our timeline. So we release things at approximately the same time. We try not to release terms, new histologic terms, for example, or new data elements before the registry data standards can get in sync with that. We're not always successful with keeping things completely in sync, but at least we know when we're out of sync, and we can have then a timeline and a plan for implementing the latest and greatest that comes out of our collaborative work. The CAP works closely with AJCC and NACER, and NACER sort of includes all of us, including the NCI and the CDC. And the AJCC and everybody else is interested in registry processes and registry data. So we work and we share our implementation timelines, and we work on common sources of truth like histology and AJCC stage details, which turn out to be very, very important. And harmonizing we have a lot of other data elements on the ECPs beyond histologic type and primary tumor site. And in the registry world, we have these other data elements called SSDIs, or site-specific data items, that are similar but not exactly the same as the data elements you have on the CAP ECPs. And we work very hard to try to make sure that the data can flow from the CAP ECPs into the registry SSDI data elements. And so that requires a lot of collaborative work on a bunch of different committees that aren't necessarily Cancer PathCHART committees. So that just sort of gets into the collaboration we have to do, and that's kind of like the underpinnings of what we're doing in Cancer PathCHART. Now, to get back to your question, is like, how is the CAP using these standards? Well, we produce these lists of ICD-03, vetted ICD-03 terms and codes. We find abnormalities sometimes, let me say, I don't know, mistakes or legacy terms that are in there that we need to remove. We find differences in spellings, differences in parentheses and commas, and little things like that that make it crazy to do searches to find the right terms, some of which are very similar. And especially for cancer registrars searching on the term, we really need to be using the term pretty much exactly as it comes out of the blue books or ICDO. One of the challenges we have is sometimes the blue books and ICDO aren't in 100% sync. Sometimes the IARC, which manages ICDO, makes some little subtle changes to it, which changes how you can search for things. That can drive you crazy. Sometimes they don't include synonyms that you think really ought to be there. And so we bring that information back into the ECP, the Cancer Protocol Development process, and we try to use as standard, the most commonly used terms as we can. And then behind the scenes, we develop maps to those terms so you can use the code rather than the letters and the commas and the dashes and the parentheses and the semicolons between translocations and things like that drive you crazy when you're doing term searches. So we try to make all those things standardized and release those as separate maps, and we'll be doing some of that. We were a little bit delayed on our latest map. It should be coming out in Q1 2025 to have some of those ICD-04 maps. We're also we've been doing some work with SNOMED CT on mapping terms that are in the cancer protocols, including histologic types, to SNOMED CT terms in addition to ICD-04. So we'll be releasing those in the near future also. So it goes both ways. It's not just how are we taking the information, from Cancer PathCHART into the cancer protocols, but there's a large part of coordinating how we all do things together at the same time, so we work on shared standards and thereby improve interoperability and decrease the effort and the errors made on the registry side.
Thank you, Rich. And just to inform our audience that the CAP protocols basically used the WHO terminology as its standard. I'd like to go back to the Cancer PathCHART, and this is for pathologist Alison. So how can pathologists access Cancer PathCHART?
Sure. So and we can provide the link and the resources for this podcast, but if you just Google Cancer PathCHART, we have a website that comes up in our products and downloads page. There are standards for 2024 and 2025. We reviewed approximately a third of the total number of tumor sites and updated the standards for those for 2024, and about another third for 2025. So those standards can be downloaded. We have them in the 4 different formats, including Excel and JSON and XML and CSV. So that's how you can access those standards if you're interested.
Thank you, Alison. So now let's talk about CPC search. So Alison and Kay, what is CPC search and how is it being used today? And can pathologists use this CPC search?
Sure. CPC search, it's a web tool that's accessible on our Cancer PathCHART website that allows users to search the validity status, if it's a valid, impossible, or unlikely site morphology combination. And so that you can enter the tumor site and then the tumor histology you're interested in. You can enter you can enter either a code or a term, and it will bring up all of the site morphology combinations that meet that combination and tell you if it's valid, unlikely, or impossible.
Yeah, pathologists are welcome to use it. I think for rare tumors, they may want to take a look at it to see if that particular combination has been reported in the registry before, for instance, and is considered, most likely it would be considered biologically unlikely if it's extremely rare, but it could keep you from making a diagnosis that's really implausible. It gives you a basis for thinking about research projects as well.
I agree, Kay. Those are good points. This may not happen, but it may happen that, say, pathologists use a term that probably it's maybe invalid, or some really old term in his diagnosis line, and then the registrar will search the term and it will come back as biologically invalid. Then we'll say, oh, okay, so the registrar will call back, ask the pathologist, and the pathologist, hey, this is correct. This is my diagnosis. How do you handle those cases?
The registrar can submit a question about Cancer PathCHART standards through Ask a SEER Registrar. This is an online form that they can fill out and ask questions. Getting that sends the questions directly to me and to the Cancer PathCHART team at NCI, and then we take those to what we call our SEER ClinCore. This is a group of subspecialty matter, I call them subspecialty matter SMEs because they're really uber subspecialized. And Dr. Washington is our GI pathologist for who we go to for those organ system questions. So, and we can go to our expert and present this question: should our standards change, or is it really an issue of this is outdated terminology? During the review process, we also generated or captured a lot of comments from about site morphology combinations from the pathologist who reviewed the site morphology combinations to determine if they're valid, unlikely, or impossible. And that's a gold mine of information that we can then reply with justification for why something was valid, unlikely, or impossible.
Yeah, I want to second that comment by Alison. Many of the biologically impossible combinations have a note that point you to the correct diagnosis.
And we don't have those comments yet, those consensus comments or those reviewer comments yet in the CPC search tool, but that is a goal in the future.
Thank you. I like what Kay pointed out for pathologists to use this tool, especially for rare tumors, because for rare tumors, some who discover this entity or describe this entity at the beginning may use a different terminology from another group who would describe this tumor. And if we go to a standard term, like in the WHO, there may be an official term for this. So maybe it's a good idea for those who are making a diagnosis of rare tumors to please check the appropriate terminology in CPC search. So the next question is, what are the plans for Cancer PathCHART and CPC search in the next few years?
Sure, we're interested in the issue of changing terminology over time and changing codes within cancer surveillance over time for site morphology combinations. And this is especially true for bone and soft tissue and the hematolymphoid malignancies. This is a big issue. We all know that the classification terminologies have changed over time. So this presents a big question mark and issue for the registrars who are trying to code the right site morphology combinations. So one of the things that we're hoping to do is to map, say, the WHO term from a given organ system in the third, fourth, fifth, and in the future, the sixth editions, to indicate if it was in ICD-0 3.2 or ICD-0 4, and what the code was in that classification. So those are just some of the things that we're hoping to do. The CAP is hosting and working with us on the Cancer PathCHART database that Rich Moldwin oversees. And so we'll be working closely together to create this more sophisticated search capability in a search tool. But that's the golden vision down the line, is that you'll be able to have more than just CPC search. You'll be able to search the consensus comments. You'll be able to search for that site morphology combination, whether it existed under ICD-03, 3.2, ICD-04, etc.
I'm sure there will be thousands of terminologies that will undergo cleanup. In terms of timeline, currently, how far are you with cleaning up the terms?
Sure. So as I mentioned, for 2020 cases diagnosed 2024 and forward, we've done about a third of the cases. An additional third were done for cases diagnosed 2025 and forward. And we are working on head and neck at this point, for 2026. The trigger point for us to begin the review process is when the latest edition WHO comes out in print. And so we are waiting for the skin, eye, and orbit and endocrine books to come out in print before we start the review process for those sites and morphologies.
Thank you, Alison. So it seems like there's something bigger on the way. So I would switch to you, Rich, and also Alison can comment. So what is the larger mapping effort underway, and when will the more powerful search web tool mapping tumor types over time be available?
As Kay mentioned, we're currently working on harmonizing the WHO Blue Book terms and codes with the primary sites where they may occur. It actually turns out to be quite a technically intensive process to do the cross maps to every single site that's present in the ICDO, International Classification of Diseases for Oncology site list. There are about 300 something terms in there, sites in there, that have to be mapped to each histologic type for a yes or no kind of response. So that's a very big production. It takes place, it'll take a few years, I think, before, as Alison mentioned, we don't have all the blue books completed. So that's ongoing. We map also to alternative terms that are occasionally found in the ECPs. Sometimes the CAP has terms that are ahead of the blue books. And then we have what comes in with the ICD-4 beta, which was just released a few weeks ago, which has its own twist on some of the terms that may match the ECPs, they may match the blue books, or they may not, and they could be subtly different or sometimes more than subtly different. So all those things need to be mapped to have common codes and have code corrections applied and documented when the codes were changed. We've also made some progress mapping ECP histologies and data elements to SNOMED CT, and in many cases we've created hundreds of new SNOMED CT terms to match the things in the ECPs. They haven't been officially released yet, but we're hoping for Q1 2025, as I mentioned before. Future mapping work will involve, for example, harmonizing terminology systems from hematologic malignancies and mapping ECP data elements to the NACER data elements, the SSDIs that I mentioned before, so that they can be automatically coded and rather than manually abstracted. And you can't use something like natural language processing for these things. They really require manual effort. And even though some people are trying to use some AI techniques for this, it's really an uphill battle right now, and they really need to be mapped from the get-go so we can get the data flowing directly from one data element on the CAP side, on the laboratory side, to the registry side. And we're also on the CAP side, we're doing another set of mappings, which are mapping each of the ECP, the histologies that you see in your computer systems. We're mapping those to the appropriate. If you have a subscription to the Blue Book web pages, you'll be able to just click on the histology and pull up the web page over there. That's on the CAP side. That's closely related to what we're doing on the Cancer PathCHART side. On the clinical oncology side, we're also looking at just sort of talking now about the possibility of incorporating some M-code data elements into the NACER data set. And then we'll have to support them in Cancer PathCHART as well. And the M-code is the minimal clinical oncology data elements initiative. It has to do with FIRE and another set of national standards on the clinical pathology side. So we may be looking at incorporating those as well. I want to kind of stick to the pathology discussion here, but we are looking a little bit ahead to what we can do with more clinical oncology data elements. Some of them include pathology data elements, but they also include clinical data elements like mixing pathology and radiology. So there are some other things going on, but that's just an overview of where we're at right now with the mapping efforts.
Thank you, Rich. Those are promising, but there's going to be a lot of work there, I could see. You mentioned something of that minimal clinical data. Right now, we've been discussing when we were discussing the PathCHART, we're talking about basically site and morphology, and you mentioned a little bit about the elements in the ECP. Is part of that bigger mapping project? Will it also cover the other elements, like important elements for oncologists, like grade or stage of the tumor beyond morphology and tumor site?
Yeah, well, it's very complicated, and the answer really has to be provided on a data element by data element basis, because the data elements are controlled in quotes by different groups. So for grade, it's mostly pathological grading. However, some types of grading systems are not completely pathological. They may include radiologic factors or patient factors, performance scales, and things like that, that get beyond where we have data on the pathology side. So we have to find ways of combining those data sets. So we're not really doing that right now with Cancer PathCHART, which is pathology focused. The other up-and-coming data elements, for example, MCODE is making quite a splash now in the EHR and data exchange area, and we do talk about these on the registry side. But right now we're really focused on the pathology side of things. It would be nice if we could include these other data elements also. Some of the MCODE data elements, just for example, are already present in a somewhat different format as SSDIs in the NACER data dictionary, and some of them are not. And so if they're felt to be important for the oncology leaders that are developing these data elements, we should be collecting them on the registry side. And so we need to look at these things in much more detail, and we'll get there. We have a lot of work to do on the pathology side, but eventually we hope to get there.
Thank you, Rich. And Alison, Rich wants you to ask the second part of the question. When will this more powerful search web tool be available?
Sure. So what I envision is that we will probably have it available for select sites as we develop the content, but I'm envisioning it could be 2027, January 2027, because we want to incorporate ICD-04. This, as you can imagine, especially for bone and soft tissue and hemopath, this is going to be a huge undertaking. So yeah, I think January 2027 is a more realistic timeline.
And for UK, so how can pathologists get involved in the review process?
Well, we're always looking for subject matter experts. And as Alison said, we still have skin, eye and orbit, and endocrine to do. And endocrine will have multiple sites within it, so we'll need multiple groups to look at that. So if anybody is an expert or has a particular interest in these sites, contact me or Alison as we start to put together those review groups. And I'm sure Alison would welcome any feedback on the website and the search tools as well.
Absolutely. And currently we're reviewing head and neck sites. So if you are an expert in those sites, please do reach out.
You need at least 3 reviewers, I believe.
Yeah, so it's the ClinCore reviewer does the first pass. That's our one subspecialist expert who does the first pass review. And then we do independent reviews by 2 to 3 additional pathologists. And then there's a consensus conference to review the discrepancies.
Thank you, Alison. So this is for you, Rich. So what are the ways other than Cancer PathCHART that CAP collaborates with public health to advance interoperability and data standards for cancer surveillance and research?
First of all, the development of the CAP cancer protocols and the electronic cancer protocols. They promote best practices, standards, accuracy, consistency in cancer diagnostics, and also in informatics. The ECPs are the best way to get standardized, discrete, coded data into pathology systems for subsequent use. for downstream uses in searching, quality measures, transmitting the data to registries. There's nothing like them. Otherwise it's you're on your own. So that's why we really encourage the use of the ECPs, and it's a big initiative at the CAP. The CAP, through our group, Cancer Protocols and Data Standards, we also, and our marketing team, we also produce these initiatives called Cancer Data Champions, which includes videos and podcasts like this. And we have a Cancer Data Summit at the CAP meeting, where we talk about a whole bunch of different issues in cancer pathology, informatics. CAP, it works with many other cancer organizations to promote data standards, and including groups like ASCO and federal agencies like the CDC and NCI, but also ONC, which is now called ASTP, and others. We work on data transmissions with groups like HL7 to standardize the way pathology data is exchanged. And one project that we're doing, for example, with the CDC and also the NCI, there's this very collaborative project we work on called the NACER Annotated List. And it's sort of like a microcosm of Cancer PathCHART. It's been going on for years. And I think Alison alluded to it, or maybe Kay alluded to it, about all the legacy terms and rearranged, they call them transform terms, that we have in this list of something like 5,000 things that has never been cleaned up. So one of the things we're doing is trying to clean up that standardized list of terms and legacy terms, mark the legacy terms as legacy, put their start date, stop date on there, the start ICDO version, the stop ICDO version. This has never been done before, and these are all derived from old faxed ICDO lists and PDF documents. So we're trying to get as much as possible standardized in there to say these are old terms. You may see this still, you may see them used, but you shouldn't be using them. You should pick a better term. So that's the NACER annotated list, and we're very far along with that right now.
I just want to add one quick thing, and that is there's a lot of interest in making cancer surveillance data available in a more timely fashion, instead of the 2+ year time lag between a cancer diagnosis and case diagnosis and when the data are actually released for statistics. We are now really advocating the use of synoptic reporting, because using the synoptics allows us to build an abstract off of electronically transmitted data, like Rich was saying, and starting that abstract in a much more timely fashion, rather than waiting for a manual abstraction process.
Thank you, Alison, and thank you, Rich, and thank you, Kay. Unfortunately, this is all the time that we have, so I would like to thank the three of you for giving us your expertise and insights and explaining to us the Cancer PathCHART and how will it impact pathologists. And I would like to pass this to you, Becca.
Thank you all for joining the podcast to talk about this important topic. And I want to thank you all for listening to this CapCast. Cancer PathCHART is a free resource available at seer.cancer.gov. We'll have a link to that in the episode description. And for more information about the CAP, visit cap.org.